Welcome, everyone, to the Jankyard, the podcast. I'm JT, and I want to thank you for joining me here today. And today, this is episode number 2 of the Jankyard, the podcast. So last week we talked about why I like to play janky, fun, weird decks, combos, and synergies. All stuff that's going to be fun to play. May not always be the top meta decks. So this week I want to talk about building janky fun decks and how I go about it. This is going to be some basics. We're going to do more in depth down the road. I'm really excited to dive deeper into the mindset of building janky decks, but also not just for me. We're going to be talking to other people, and I look forward to talking to some of our community, some of the viewers of our stream, and the listeners here to talk about how other people build decks and what they think about when they're building decks and putting something fun together. So this is just kind of a basics. This is definitely something we're going to go further in depth on as we move forward. So, let's start, on the basics here. And before we get started, though, I just want to remind everybody, on the Jankyard, I play strange, weird, janky decks every week on our stream. We stream on Wednesdays, Sundays, and possibly some other days. Always check our Twitter at JankyardM and our Facebook, JankyardMTG, for updates on when we're going live. You can also check out our website, jankyardmtg.com, and make sure to check out our YouTube channel at JankyardMTG. So, okay, let's get started. I want to talk about how I go about constructing a deck, doing something that's fun. It starts with picking either a theme or, more often than not, a particular card. There's a card I've seen that, I just say, wow, I really want to build with this deck. Whether it's an alternate win condition, something like Approach of the Second Sun, Mechanized Production, Revel in Riches, even Happily Ever After. Any decks like these, or maybe something that does unusual things. A lot of times this cards that do unusual things, like Yarok, which doubles ETB triggers, or Panharmonicon, which doubled ETB triggers. Or maybe I want to use Gaunty to steal my opponent's stuff. There's a wide variety of cards that appeal to me because they're unusual. They do strange things, and for the most part, traditionally, these cards require building around, and that's why they're better in constructed than limited. A lot of the cards that jump out at me are ones that would be given like a straight unplayable F in limited because they're fun. Or I might want to go in the direction of a traditional theme that is still, not always the most effective, and it could be something like Mill. Mill is an alternate win condition, definitely. You're trying to get your opponent to have nothing left in their library, or because of a couple cards now, you're trying to get yourself to have nothing left in your library. You're not worried about getting your opponent to 0 from 20. It's an alternate win condition. So you might want to, take that route. It's rarely, I'm just going to play good stuff of a couple colors. You're looking for something, or a combo, a couple of cards that will work together to do something really cool and awesome and win a game. And then you're trying to figure, okay, what's the best way to make that combo work as often as possible? Or another theme I often hit on is tribal, because tribal decks are rarely meta. I shouldn't say they're not meta. Spirits right now is meta in Pioneer. Humans has been meta in Modern. And for those that don't know, when we say meta, we're talking about in the wider scope of decks that are played, those meta or tier 1, tier 2 decks, those top tier decks, they are the decks that are played the most, the top players have the most success with. So a lot of other players pick up these decks because they know that those are the decks they have the best chance of having success with. Because being a great player is very important. Being even a sound player is important. But if you go in with a deck that's several steps below the decks of what other players are playing, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. And you know that is often something that happens with jank players. We're not really going to get into that today. We're going to talk about winning and losing and all that at another time. But today we're just talking about building decks. So, tribal is something I do like to do, and it's usually an unusual tribal. Right now on our stream in Standard, I'm playing Satyr tribal. Well, I mean, there's not a lot of satyrs in the history of Magic, but there's a number in the current Theros Beyond Death set. And then you just find some ways to make those synergies work together. Tribal decks are all about synergy. You look at the modern humans deck, where it has different humans entering the battlefield that buff up other humans, and you've got big creatures, little creatures that have turned into big creatures that can all smash in together. It's things like that that make tribal great, and why tribal can be considered a lot of the time as janky, because it is all about synergies. It's about big combos. Instead of one or two or three specific cards comboing together, it's a whole suite of cards that combo together. So that's that's another part of it. Now I got to say, one thing I want to say is not all ideas have to be yours. For when you're putting together a plan to put together a janky deck, I know, like myself, a lot of the time I eschew net decking, which is the art of taking a deck list off the internet, putting the cards together and playing that. But at the same time, it doesn't have to be your idea. A lot of good ideas come from other people, and we're going to get into that a little bit later. But yeah, if you hear about other combos, or you see other deck techs, and think, yeah, I want to put something together like this, I put my spin on it, or even just put mainly the same thing together, that's fine too. Remember, just because it's someone else's idea doesn't mean it's not a good idea. And I mean, for example, I heard about the True Fire Captain Starve Extinction deck back in Standard last year, before rotations. True Fire Captain says whenever it's dealt damage, do that much damage to target opponent. Starve Extinction does 20 damage to each creature. So you have True Fire Captain out, it gets hit, it automatically does 20 damage to your opponent, so boom. So I heard about that. Somebody is like, you haven't heard about this combo yet? And I hadn't. So eventually I made the deck work. I shouldn't say made the deck work. I put the deck together and played it. Was it the most effective deck in the world? No. But was it a lot of fun to play? Absolutely. So, like I said, it doesn't have to be entirely your idea. So, once you've got it figured out, maybe you don't know all the cards you want to put with, you want to put into action. You have the theme, but you need to find some cards that fit. Start looking on something like Scryfall or Wizard's Own Magic Gatherer. Put in search words, like find the proper templating on something you want to find on a card, like enters the battlefield. Put that in the search engine. Limit the you might already have a good sense of what colors you want. You might not. You might just want to go wide, and that might take sifting through a lot of cards. I was working on Pioneer Humans deck, and I decided, okay, I'm not going to limit colors. Let's just see what we got. There were hundreds of cards in Pioneer that are humans. So it might take time, but you go through there for looking for inspiration and looking for different cards that might be fun to add. Um, and as you're starting to pull that together, and even maybe before you do that, you have to say to yourself, what do you want the deck to accomplish? And how do you want it to do that? Is it just one combo, or maybe you've got multiple combos that you can pull together? I think one of my favorite cards is Tree of Perdition. I love Tree of Perdition. Now, if you don't remember Tree of Perdition, it is a card from Shadows of Innistrad, Shadows over Innistrad. And it was a 3 and a black creature tree. It had Defender, and it was an 0-13. But it also said you could tap it to exchange its toughness with an opponent's life total. So, in putting together a Pioneer deck recently, there's a few ways to try to take advantage of this. One of the obvious ones is Triskaidekaphobia. That's the enchantment that says, on upkeep, if a player has 13 life, they lose the game. If not, then you choose either each player loses 1 life or each player gains 1 life. So, I mean, the fun thing there is, if you've got the tree and you've got the Triskaidekaphobia, tap the tree in response to the upkeep trigger and put your opponent's total to 13 and life total to 13. If they can't change it, you got yourself a win. But then there's other ways to use that. In the past, in Modern, I've used things like Doran the Siege Tower and Assault Formation, which allow defenders to attack. Assault Formation allows defenders to attack. Doran doesn't. But also, both cards say all creatures you control do damage with their toughness instead of their power. Well, okay, now it's hitting as a 13-13 essentially. Another fun way to play things is with Tainted Remedy. Tainted Remedy is an enchantment that says if an opponent would gain life, they lose that much life instead. So, for example, if you've got your opponent down to 6 life and you have the Tree of Perdition out and Tainted Remedy, again, here's a combo. You can tap Tree of Perdition, which would put their life from 6 up to 13, which is a gain of 7 life. Because of Tainted Remedy, instead of gaining 7 life, they lose 7 life and they lose the game. I actually did that to somebody in Standard a few years ago. It was so much fun. And then, the other thing I was looking at in the Pioneer recently with a card from the newest set was Nightmare Shepherd, which is a 4/4 flyer that says when another non-token creature is that you control dies, you may exile it, and if you do, you can create a 1/1 token of that creature that is also in a nightmare in addition to its other creature types, but it still has its own abilities. So now you've got a 1/1 Tree of Perdition, tap it to put your opponent's life total to 1. So, as you can see, I have different ways to try to win. Sometimes you might only have one way to win, like milling, but you have a whole bunch of cards that do it. So, yeah, figure out how you want to win the game and how you want to get there. Because you might look at somebody and go, okay, I need time to set up. Okay. How do I get that set up? And that's where we look at other types of cards you want to play in the deck. Big thing is removal. Card draw. Counter spells. These are all things, if you need either, probably not control, more like a tempo. You need to slow the tempo down. You need to set your opponent back and keep them from blowing ahead while you get set up, because you are more than likely running, if you're playing a jank deck, it's some type of combo. You need multiple cards out. And sometimes they're expensive. And maybe you need ramp. And to get, to play those bigger cards as quickly as possible. These are all different things that you've got to look at as to how you want to get to where you're going to. And a lot of times with jank decks, you have to look at how do I slow my opponent down. And so those are all ways to think about removal, counter spells, ramp to speed yourself up, card draw to speed yourself up, and keep going. And so you have to look at, okay, the cards I need to do the combos I want to do, to pull everything together, and how much of those do I need, and how much do I want to put in? How much do I want to put towards tempo, to protecting the cards I'm casting? Maybe some to give them hexproof. Counter spells. Oftentimes there needs to be a balance. Now, sometimes especially if you might think you might have a faster deck, you go, you know what? I'm going to try to go all in. I'm going all in on the method I'm trying to get to. For example, when I was building a butts deck a year ago, saw a couple of examples online with some suggestions, and took that from there to build a butts deck that used Hylard and Watley and Arcades to swing with toughness. And I used a whole bunch of 1-mana creatures that were 0-3s and 0-4s, and a 1-2 mana that was an 0-5. So my whole idea there was, I just want to go fast, get an enabler out on turn 3 so I can just swing with everything very quickly. Swing with a bunch of creatures. I went all in. I think I had maybe no removal even in early incarnation of that deck. Now that's a risky play. But sometimes you got to give all in a try, and then you put the counter spells and the removal and all that. You put that in sideboard. And one other thing to think about for sure is you have to make concessions sometimes, whether you're playing paper, whether you're playing Magic Gathering Online, or whether you're playing Arena. You have to give considerations for economy. If you're playing in paper and MTGO, can I afford to buy all the cards I need? Maybe I only put a couple in because I can't afford them all. I have 1 or 2 already. Maybe you can, you've got some friends you can borrow from to get the deck put together in paper. In Arena, do you have all of the wild cards to be able to pull a deck together? A lot of times when you're building a janky deck, there's at least a number of cards because you're playing with unusual cards. A lot of unusual cards are rares and mythics. So you're going to need those rare mythic wild cards to make it work. That has to be a consideration. Economy is always going to be a consideration. Sometimes you feel, especially if you think, I'm going to play this deck for a while, this is one I'm going to have fun with and keep tweaking and just trying to get further and further, okay, I'll make the investment. But sometimes you got to say, it's not worth the investment right now. So I'm going to not go with 4 of that card. I'm just going to go with 2 or 3. It's not optimal. It absolutely is not optimal, but it might be optimal for you and for your life and for your Magic economics. So those are all important things to think about. And then, something else that's absolutely crucial is land base. Are you looking to play a 5-color deck? I was playing in Standard recently a 5-color Niv Mizzet Happily Ever After Golos deck. Okay, the mana base was wacky. And you have to know, if you're playing a 5-color deck, you got to do everything you can to try to compensate for that. If you just play, 4 basics of each, or 5 basics of each, you're screwed. Plain and simple. You're not going to be able to get to do the fun stuff you want to do. So you have to have dual lands, preferably in current Standard and Pioneer, the shock lands the ones you pay to life to bring in untapped, those are your best options. But also there's the check lands, the fast lands. The check lands, say if you control, say in the case of Glacial Fortress, if you control an island or a plains, it comes in untapped. The fast lands, which say if you have 2 or fewer lands out already, it comes in untapped. The scry lands, which the temples, which are in the current standard, which come in tapped but allow you to scry one when they get entered. You definitely, if you're going multiple colors, you've got to think about that. Or even Fable Passage, which is very expensive. Or maybe you want to go with Fable Passage's cheap cousin, Evolving Wilds, which for the first 3 turns does the exact same thing as Fable Passage. Which says, sack it, go find a basic land, bring it in tapped. Fable Passage, when it lands, when you sack Fable Passage and the basic you go get hits the battlefield, if it's the 4th land you have or more, if it gives you 4 or more lands, you untap it. Evolving Wilds doesn't give you that. So you might want something like that. You might need lands, for things like Field of Ruin to destroy your opponent's basics. Or maybe you want Blast Zone, so you have a way to use a land to blow up some of your opponent's creatures. There's a lot of things to consider with land base, and money is definitely another thing when it comes to land base. Lands are the most expensive thing. Well, okay, I don't want to say the most expensive thing, but consistently, if you look at decks, a lot of the money consistently comes from lands. Lands are the expensive lands, like fetch lands and shock lands. They're not cheap. A playset of breeding pools, here in Canada, will run you over $100 now. So, these are all things to consider. But make sure, and also when you're doing the land base, it's not just you have the right mix of colors. And one thing I do is I will count how many cards of each color. If I'm playing like a 3 or 4 color deck, or even a 2 color deck, how many lands of each color do we have? How many cards of each color do we have? All right, well, we have 11 cards that have blue mana, 7 cards that have green mana, 6 that have white mana. Okay, well, if we're using a bunch of dual lands, I need to make sure I have more lands that generate blue mana than any other land in that mana base. If that's my mix, say 13 blue, 7 green, and 6 white, and I'm running something, running a mana base that makes 17 of the cards make white, 15 make green, and 8 make blue, it's not going to work well. So you've got to make sure that the amount of lands you have of a certain color are commensurate with the amount of cards you have in your deck with that color. The other thing to think about is the number of lands. 24 is always kind of seen as the general sweet spot. It's the recommended number. And then you tweak from around there. If you need to see a lot of lands, if it's crucial to have lands, maybe you need to go 25, maybe even 26. If you've got a low curve, or you only have, maybe you're only running one color, or you have other forms of ramp, maybe you shave shave 1 or 2 down. These are all things you have to consider, and quite frankly, you can put a kind of an estimate when you're building the deck initially. And what I do is I go on to my account on Goldfish, and I build the deck there, and then I play it. And then you tweak and go like, oh, wow, we are way too short of lands. Let's make this change. Oh, wow, it feels like too many lands. Let's shave 1 and see what happens. Geez, I'm not seeing enough of this color. Let's shave that and see what happens. All things that you can take into consideration. And, that's something we're going to get to, is working on that. And then the next thing is, sideboard. And I mean, for that, I I like to put together a toolbox sideboard. Think about what are the biggest things you're going to see and you're going to have to deal with when you're playing games. There are like basic things you can expect. Usually, removal spells, counter spells. So, do you have ways to deal with that? Are you playing blue? Maybe you play Mystical Dispute. Are you expecting to see green and red decks? Maybe you play Aether Gust. You know, cards. Are you expecting lots of enchantments? Maybe you need enchantment hate. Or, wow, right now graveyard decks are big. Okay, let's put in some graveyard hate. These are all considerations to make, and that's you use that 15 card sideboard to build your toolbox. Maybe you think, well, I would like to have a little extra of so and so in the deck. But I don't know if it needs that fourth card, so let's put that in the sideboard. I know when I'm building, one thing I'll do is as I'm trimming cards, because a lot of times I'll go through and see, okay, I want this card and this card and this card and this card, and then I have to trim. I will put a lot of the trim cards in the sideboard, and then we build the toolbox. And a lot of times, a lot of those trim cards, okay, don't need you. Oh, yeah, you're pretty good. Okay, and then let's look for our toolbox. The sideboard is where I'd say we're the least janky. That's where we're putting those effective sideboard cards to deal with our opponent's deck. The main board is all about, for the most part, doing what we want to do while factoring in trying to impact our opponent's play. That's that tempo factor. But it's the sideboard, that's where we really think about what we're going to face and how do we want to deal with our opponents. I've built a lot of different fun janky decks. I built a Grixis deck a couple years ago that was all about making treasures and then sacking them to Marionette Master to do a ton of damage. You use Brass's Bounty to make 7 or more treasures, and then you just sack them all to a 4/6 Marionette Master, and each treasure you sack does 4 damage to your opponent. And you also have Revel in Riches in there, so if you're up to 10 treasures, you win. Or you use Mechanized, I made a deck with Mechanized Production, and it was Bant Clues. So I was trying to make 8 clues, and if I got to 8 clues, I won the game with Mechanized Production. And so you're using Panharmonicon to double ETB effects, all these, just different things. So I've built so many different decks. It is it's a lot of fun. I have a lot of fun looking at different decks. Like I said, I'll build weird tribal decks. I build the big butts decks that do damage with their toughness. I've built Boros Control. That's red-white control. Red-white is historically most associated with go fast, hit your opponent to the face, get them done quickly. I've used those colors to build control because there are good removal spells in those colors. So, yeah, there's a lot I've done. There's a lot more to do. There's so many cards I see. And now that Pioneer has opened this whole new kind of Pandora's box of fun, and there's a lot of cards that I loved playing with in Standard before, or I've never saw because they predate me, that I'm like, yeah, I want to build with that. And so it's a lot of fun, even just looking at different cards and going, yeah, I want to build something with that. Or, yeah, I see that synergy. Let's see what we can do to make that work as a deck. And, I will tell you, everybody's definition of jank is different. Figure out, if you want to play janky decks, and I use air quotes, figure out what appeals to you. Maybe it's combos. Maybe it's tribal. Maybe it's both. Maybe it's just something really unusual. Maybe it's, a less normal take on a more traditional deck. Think about what you define as jank and what you enjoy most. Now, something that's very important in building decks is cooperation. Uh, Talk to other players. I've built several decks on stream, and it's been a lot of fun because some of the other viewers also have great ideas. Well, all of the other viewers have great ideas and throw out suggestions for building a deck. So we've built decks as a community several times, and I encourage you to join us on our stream on twitch.tv/jankyardmtg. Plug. Uh, but anyways, I mean, to me that's a lot of the fun of Magic. Magic is a social game, and it's fun to meet with people and talk with people. And one of the things you can talk to people about when you're playing a social game like this is how to build decks. How would you build this deck? What do you think about this card? I find that even playing in limited, you've got your cards spread in front of you, and you're sitting with somebody, and you hold up a card and go, "What do you think about this card?" Well, that's what happens in building janky decks, because you're maybe beating a path that's been that's been trailblazed before. I mean, maybe you're knocking down a whole new path. It's good to get people who can look at decks a little differently than you to speak up, or they might think of a card you never thought of or you don't even know exists. Remember, there are 20,000 plus cards in the history of Magic. I think there's a lot, and some people might have some thoughts that you never even considered. So talk to people, use your base of friends, and I mean, maybe they can also help loan you cards too, but they can give suggestions like, no, take this route, go with this one. And then, something else is play the deck. Whether you're playing on Arena, on Magic Online, you're playing it in paper, play it, refine it, and hone it. I mean, you're going to take it out, and chances are good you might fall on your face with it. Work on it. Like, for example, I was talking earlier about the Truefire Captain Star of Extinction deck. I mean, the first time I took it out, it was a little rough and a little slow, but I had one fantastic game. It went really long. I stopped my opponent from doing stuff because it was all this removal. This is the Boros control, the red-white control deck I was talking about. And then I finally got the combo to go off. I had 2 Truefire Captains out, hit Star of Extinction, do 40 damage to him. He was at 30-some life. We win the game. So that's satisfying. So you're going to get there. Keep working on refining that deck, thinking about taking notes, whether they're mental or physical, of what worked. Maybe, okay, I'm low on lands far more often than normal. This feels like it's not just variance. Okay, adjust. And then if you adjust and you're feeling like, wow, I'm just getting flooded now. Okay, maybe it was variance. Tweak. Okay, I need more removal. I need less removal. I need more in terms of win conditions. I need more cards of this, less cards of that. Don't give up on a deck. Keep trying stuff out. That being said, and the big thing is, there's a very good chance you're going to lose early. Don't get down about it. And, you're going to encounter decks that don't let you do what you want to do. One of the shows we're going to have down the road is talking about coping with control. Control decks are all about not letting you have fun, and you're trying to have fun by playing a fun combo or playing, fun synergies with a bunch of cards. Don't get down about it when you're not allowed to have your fun. Keep working on trying to find the ways to make that fun work more effectively. Make it work more easily. It might not always be there, but do your best to refine and hone. And sometimes, you know what you need to do? Take that deck, set it aside. Come back in a few months or a few weeks. Maybe you have another idea. Maybe you look at it and go, why was I playing with this? Why didn't I play with this card? Maybe you wait until a new set comes out and you go, oh, wow, this card works really well with this deck. So sometimes it's good for the soul to set a deck aside. You can come back to it later. And, you know, some jank decks, some jank decks are going to work out fairly well. You're going to have some success. My big butts decks, I've actually had some success on, Monday nights or Tuesday nights playing standard. Um, I haven't maybe necessarily had a lot of success with big tournaments, but I've had some limited success. Some of my other decks, they just didn't work. They didn't click right. Um, Tweaking still, I didn't get there. Some decks are going to work better than others. And you have to, like I said, don't give up right away and work at refining and honing, but sometimes you either have to accept that this deck just isn't going to have as high a success rate as other decks, or maybe you do set it down. Uh, Ultimately, though, I think one of the biggest things to take away from this is when you're building a deck, when you're putting together a janky, fun deck, there's the word. I just said the word, fun. Are you having fun playing this deck? Does it give you some level of joy? Even if you don't get there, you don't know, maybe you only pull off the combo once in every 10 games, but you do some silly stuff and you have a good laugh and you enjoy it, then that's great. But if you're not having that, like even if it's coming together and it's still like, this isn't fun, it's doing what I want it to do, but I'm not enjoying it, don't play it. Find a better deck. There's so many cards in Magic, and there's so many interactions in Magic. You can find other things that will excite you, will feel fun. Maybe get better chances at winning, but also give you better chances at doing really cool things that will thrill you. There's no point in playing this game if you're not having fun. I cannot stress that enough. I've been playing Magic pretty much, without a break now for 5 years since I started playing. I still have so much fun with it because I'm playing decks that give me great delight. There's a deck, if you check our recent deck techs and our recent Jank Light of the Week, there's a deck with Kraken, Serpents, Octopuses, and Leviathans. Using Serpent of the Yawning Depths, which allows all Kraken, Serpents, Octopuses, and Leviathans you control to attack, and they can only be blocked by Kraken, Serpents, Octopuses, and Leviathans. That deck has lost a number of games. It's won some, and it is so much fun. So that's why I do this. That's why I'm playing these crazy decks. So that's I would say that's the 35,000 foot view of building janky decks for me. And maybe you do it differently, and I would love to hear how. Leave your comments talking about how you go about building decks and what's important for you when you put a deck together. Are you looking at the synergy? Are you looking at specific cards? Or are you looking at what you can afford? What drives your decision making? I would love to hear. Like I said, hopefully we can get something going in the near future where we can sit down and interview some of you for the podcast, because I'd like to hear what everybody else has to say. Because everybody, if you're listening to this, you enjoy to some extent having fun with combos and synergies and different cards. So it's always good to get other people's perspective about pulling those together. So by all means, leave your comments. And make sure to check us out every Wednesday and every Sunday when we stream. Plus, we might stream on other days. So check at Jankyard M on Twitter and Jankyard MTG on Facebook for our updates of when we're going live. Also check out our deck techs we have on our YouTube channel, as well as the weekly Jank Light of the Week, which is a game or part of a game from a recent stream where we have a bit of fun. And usually it's our deck going off. Sometimes it's our opponents. So check out all that. And I really appreciate you spending time with us today. as we dive into building jank decks. And I look forward to talking to you next week here on the Jankyard, the podcast.